The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never felt so peaceful. Ambassador Kale of the Vrexian Empire stood at the center podium, his silver skin gleaming under the bright lights. Around him, representatives from 47 different species watched with satisfaction written across their alien faces. "Today marks 3 months since the humans vanished," Kale announced, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. 3 months of true peace in our galaxy." A chorus of approval rippled through the crowd. The crystalline Nexari chimed in harmony, while the gas-like Etherians pulsed with pleased colors. For the first time in centuries, the council met without the constant tension that humans always brought to every discussion. "Our survey teams have visited over 200 human worlds," Kale continued. "All empty. Not a single human remains anywhere in known space. Their cities stand vacant, their ships drift powerless, their colonies are silent. It is as if they simply chose to disappear overnight." Captain Bex of the Aquarian Fleet raised a tentacle. "What about their military installations, their weapon systems?" "All abandoned," Kale replied with obvious relief. "Our salvage teams are already stripping their technology. Finally, we can benefit from human innovations without dealing with their paranoid restrictions." In the depths of space, far from the celebrating council, something very different was happening. Commander Tejo floated in the bridge of his ship, the last human consciousness still active in this part of the galaxy. His body had died months ago, but his mind lived on in the ship's computer systems. He had volunteered for this final duty before humanity departed. Through his ship's sensors, Tejo watched alien salvage crews tear apart human defense stations. The crews worked quickly, eager to claim valuable technology, but they avoided certain areas completely. The zones humans had marked with red warnings, the sectors surrounded by massive defensive walls, the regions where human ships had patrolled endlessly for unknown reasons. "Fools," Tejo whispered through the ship's speakers, though no one could hear him. "They have no idea what we were protecting them from." His sensors detected another salvage operation near the edge of the Corvin system. A Zephyrian mining ship was cutting through the hull of an abandoned human research station. The station's warning beacons had been shut off weeks ago. The aliens thought they were just energy-wasting human paranoia. Tejo tried to send a warning signal, but the Zephyrians had already disabled the human communication networks in this sector. He could only watch as they broke through the station's outer defenses and began looting the interior. On the planet below, Dr. Sora Kim walked through her empty laboratory. She had chosen to remain behind when humanity left, transferring her consciousness into an android body. Someone needed to document what would happen next. Someone needed to witness the consequences. Her mechanical feet made soft clicking sounds on the metal floor as she moved between abandoned research stations. The aliens had already taken most of the useful equipment, but they had left behind all the warning systems, the devices that monitored dimensional stability, the sensors that watched for reality distortions, the barriers that kept certain things contained. Sora stopped at a large monitor that still flickered with data. The screen showed a map of the local galactic region, covered in red warning zones. Each red area marked a place where space itself was unstable, where the barriers between dimensions were thin, where things that should not exist sometimes tried to break through. Before humanity's departure, these zones had been constantly monitored. Human ships patrolled their borders. Human scientists studied their properties. Human soldiers stood ready to respond when something went wrong. Now the zones were unwatched and unguarded. Day 92 since departure, Sora spoke into her recorder. The Nexari have established mining operations in the Theta sector. They removed the warning buoys yesterday. They believe the human restrictions were simply territorial claims. She paused and looked at her readings. Several dimensional stability sensors were showing fluctuations, small ones barely noticeable but growing steadily stronger. "The barriers are weakening," she continued. "Without constant maintenance, the quantum locks are beginning to fail. I estimate we have perhaps 6 months before the first containment breach." Back in the council chambers, the celebration continued. Trade Minister Vox of the Zephyrian Consortium was describing the new shipping routes now available through former human space. "The humans claimed these passages were dangerous," Vox said with amusement in his voice. "But our ships have been using them for weeks without problems. We can now transport goods directly from the core worlds to the outer rim in half the time. What? About their warnings of spatial anomalies? Asked Counselor Thex, a cautious creature with multiple eyes. Vox waved a dismissive appendage. Human superstition. Their sensors were simply miscalibrated. We have detected nothing unusual in those regions. As if responding to his words, a priority message flashed on the chamber's main screen. An emergency signal from the Corvin system. The message was brief and confused. Mining Station Delta 7 has gone silent. Last transmission spoke of unusual readings. Investigation team being dispatched. The council members barely glanced at the message. Lost mining stations were common. Enough. Equipment failed, accidents happened, pirates sometimes raided isolated operations. Nothing to worry about. But Tejo saw the report through his monitoring systems, and his digital heart filled with dread. Station Delta 7 was exactly where. He had watched the Zephyrians breaking into the human research facility. The facility that had been studying something called Project Threshold. He accessed his archived files, searching for information about the project. What he found made his artificial neurons fire in patterns of pure terror. Project Threshold had been studying dimensional rifts, places where other realities pressed against their own. The research notes spoke of entities that existed in the spaces between spaces, creatures that fed on the fabric of reality itself. The humans had not been studying these things out of curiosity. They had been trying to keep them contained. 3 days later, the investigation team sent to find Mining Station Delta 7 made a discovery that would have horrified any human scientist. They found the station's remains twisted into impossible, geometric shapes. The metal hull had been folded into patterns that hurt to look at, angles that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. The crew was gone. Not dead, not vaporized, simply absent. Their personal belongings remained untouched, their meals still warm on their tables, but the beings themselves had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. The investigating captain filed a brief report attributing the incident to unknown space phenomenon and recommended avoiding the area. The report was filed away and forgotten, but in the depths of space, Tejo added another entry to his growing list of incidents. The same list that human commanders had been maintaining for centuries. The list of encounters with things that should not exist. It has begun, he transmitted into the void, hoping somehow his message might reach the departed humans. The Watchers are gone, and the watched are stirring. In the distance, where the investigation team had found the twisted remains of the mining station, space itself seemed to shimmer slightly. For just a moment, reality appeared thin, like fabric stretched too tight. Then the moment passed, and everything looked normal again. But something had noticed the breach, something vast and hungry, pressing against the boundaries of existence, had felt the barrier weaken. And in the darkness between dimensions, ancient appetites began to stir. 2 years had passed since humanity vanished, and the galaxy had never seemed more prosperous. Trade flowed freely through space routes that humans had once blocked with their warships. Alien colonies thrived on worlds that humans had declared off-limits. The great mining corporations pulled precious metals from asteroids that humans had surrounded with warning beacons. Captain Hyan Su guided his merchant ship through what humans had called the Andromeda Gap. His cargo holds were full of rare crystals from the former restricted zones, and his crew was in good spirits. The trade run that would have taken 3 months through the old approved routes now took only 3 weeks. "Captain," called his navigator, a young Altarian named Zix. "I'm getting strange readings on the sensors. There should be a convoy of Vrexian traders somewhere in this sector, but I can't find them." Hyan Su frowned. The Vrexian convoy had left Kepler Station 2 days before them, carrying valuable electronics to the Outer Rim colonies. They should have been easy to track on the sensors. "Maybe they changed course," Hyan Su suggested. "Check the emergency frequencies." Zix worked at his console, scanning through communication channels. After several minutes, he looked up with confusion on his blue-scaled face. "Captain, I found something. It's a distress signal, but it's very weak, and the words don't make sense." Hyan Su moved to the communication station. The signal was indeed weak, breaking up with static. Through the noise, he could hear a Vrexian, voice speaking in panicked tones. "The angles, they're opening. Stars are wrong. They come from between. Reality is..." The signal cut to silence. "Plot a course to those coordinates," Hyun-soo ordered. "Maximum speed." When they reached the location, they found something that made the entire crew stare in silent horror. The Vrexian ships were still there, but they had been changed into something impossible. The metal hulls were twisted into shapes that hurt to look at, folded in ways that suggested more than 3 dimensions. Some sections of the ship seemed to exist in 2 places at once, while other parts flickered in and out of sight. "By the 7 moons," whispered Zix. What could do this? Hyun-soo had seen enough strange things in his years as a merchant to know when retreat was the wisest option. But as they prepared to leave, his sensors detected something else. Life signs were still present in one of the twisted ships. Against his better judgment, Hyun-soo ordered a boarding party. They found 3 surviving Vrexians huddled in what had once been the ship's medical bay. The walls around them bent at angles that made no geometric sense, but somehow the small room remained normal. The survivors could barely speak. Their eyes stared at nothing, and they mumbled constantly about angles and spaces between spaces. One of them, a female engineer, grabbed Hyun-soo's arm with desperate strength. "They came through when the barrier failed," she whispered. "Things that live in the gaps between reality. They're hungry. So hungry. They eat space itself." Before Hyun-soo could ask more questions, the survivor's eyes rolled back, and she fell unconscious. The rescue team quickly moved all 3 survivors to their ship and departed the twisted wreckage behind. On the other side of the galaxy, archaeologist Min-Ah Lee was making a discovery that would have terrified any human scientist. Her team had found ancient ruins on a world humans had kept strictly quarantined. The local Galactic Council officials had lifted the quarantine 6 months earlier, declaring it another example of human overcaution. The ruins were clearly pre-galactic, built by a civilization that had died out millions of years ago. The architecture was strange, with walls that seemed to curve in impossible directions and doorways that appeared larger on the inside than the outside. "The energy readings are off the charts," reported Dr. Kess, Minna's assistant. The insect-like, scientists' compound eyes reflected the strange glow coming from deep within the ruins. Minna nodded as she studied her instruments. The entire structure pulsed with some kind of power that her equipment couldn't properly identify. It wasn't nuclear, electromagnetic, or any known form of energy. It seemed to exist partially outside normal space. "The symbols on the walls," she said, pointing to carved markings that hurt to look at directly. "They're similar to warnings we found in human databases. Something about entities from parallel dimensions." Her team had been working at the site for 2 weeks, and strange things had begun happening. Equipment would be found in different locations than where they had left it. Shadows moved independently of the objects that cast them, and every night, the entire team shared the same nightmare. In the dream, vast, tentacled shapes pressed against a thin barrier that separated their reality from somewhere else. The barrier was cracking, developing thin lines that leaked darkness into their world. And through those cracks, hungry things watched and waited. "Dr. Lee," called one of her assistants from deeper in the ruins. "You need to see this." Min-Ah made her way through corridors that seemed to change configuration when she wasn't looking directly at them. Her assistant stood before a large chamber filled with crystalline structures that pulsed with malevolent light. "I've never seen anything like these crystals," the assistant said. "They seem to exist in multiple dimensions at once. And when I got close to them, I could hear something whispering." As if responding to his words, the crystals began to pulse faster. The whispers grew louder, speaking in no language that any galactic species had ever heard. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, bypassing the ears and speaking directly to the mind. Minna felt a presence pressing against her consciousness, something vast and alien trying to communicate. Images flashed through her mind. Stars going out one by one, reality unraveling like worn fabric, creatures made of living darkness consuming entire galaxies. "Everyone out," she ordered, fighting against the alien thoughts invading her mind. "Evacuate the site immediately." But, even as her team fled the ruins, Min-Ah knew they were too late. Something had been awakened by their presence. The crystal's pulsing had synchronized into a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat counting down to some terrible event. Meanwhile, on the Council homeworld, Former human diplomat Dalray Park sat in her small office, studying reports that everyone else was ignoring. She had chosen to remain in galactic space after humanity's departure, working as an independent advisor. Her human perspective was sometimes useful for understanding old human policies, but lately, that perspective was showing her patterns that filled her with growing dread. 17 missing ships in the Andromeda Gap, she muttered, reviewing the files on her computer. 23 mining operations gone silent near former human restricted zones. 42 archaeological sites reporting equipment malfunctions and crew psychological problems. Every incident occurred in areas that humans had once heavily monitored. Every disappearance happened near locations that human scientists had studied with great concern. Every strange phenomenon manifested in regions where humans had maintained massive defensive installations. Dalray pulled up the old human military databases that she still had access to. The files were heavily encrypted, but her diplomatic codes still worked. What she found made her blood run cold. The humans had documented thousands of incidents over the centuries. Encounters with entities that existed between dimensions, breaches in the barriers that separated realities, things that fed on the fabric of space itself, growing stronger with each meal. Every human military exercise had actually been a response to some dimensional incursion. Every restricted zone marked a place where reality was thin. Every paranoid security protocol had been designed to contain threats that could destroy entire civilizations. And now, without human oversight, those barriers were failing one by one. Dalray's computer chimed with an incoming priority message. The Nexari High Command was broadcasting a live celebration from their new mining operation in the Omega Nebula. They had finally breached the massive asteroid field that humans had declared absolutely forbidden. She watched the feed with growing horror as Nexari mining ships carved into asteroids that glowed with the same strange energy she had seen in the archaeological reports. The Nexari miners worked cheerfully, unaware that they were dismantling structures that had contained something for millions of years. "Today marks a new era of prosperity," declared the Nexari commander on the broadcast. "Finally, we can access the incredible mineral wealth of the Omega Nebula without human interference." The camera panned across the mining operation, showing dozens of ships working to extract precious metals from the glowing asteroids. In the background, the nebula itself pulsed with colors that seemed too bright, too alive. Then the feed began to distort. The image flickered and twisted as something vast emerged from the nebula's core. Dalray caught only a glimpse of it before the transmission cut to static. Tentacles the size of moons, wrapped around something that might have been a mouth or might have been a doorway to somewhere else entirely. When the transmission ended, the Omega Nebula was empty except for twisted metal that had once been ships. The Nexari mining fleet had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. Dalray stared at her dark screen, finally understanding the true scope of the disaster that was beginning to unfold. Humanity hadn't abandoned the galaxy out of spite or exhaustion. 5 years had passed since humanity vanished, and the galaxy was dying. Not the slow death of aging stars or cooling planets, but something far worse. Entire star systems simply stopped existing, erased so completely that only a few individuals could even remember they had ever been there. The Galactic Council had moved its headquarters 3 times, fleeing from regions where space itself had become unstable. Trade routes that had operated for thousands of years now led to empty void, where planets and stars had once shone. The great civilization that had celebrated humanity's departure was crumbling into panic and chaos. Jiwoo Chen worked alone in the ruins of a human research facility on the abandoned world of Kepler-7. The cybernetic archaeologist had spent months digging through damaged computer systems, trying to understand what the humans had really been doing during their time in the galaxy. The facility's main computer core was heavily damaged, but Jiwoo's cybernetic implants allowed him to interface directly with the remaining data fragments. What he found there changed everything he thought he knew about human history. Personal log of Admiral Sarah Chen, Human Defense Force. The first recovered file began. Day 12,847 of the watch. Another incursion in Sector 7. The barriers held, but barely. The entities are getting stronger, more persistent. They know we're the only thing standing between them and a galaxy full of fresh prey. Jiwoo's artificial heart skipped a beat as he processed the implications. The humans hadn't just been another galactic species. They had been actively fighting something, conducting a war that no one else even knew existed. He accessed more files, each one revealing pieces of a vast puzzle. The humans called themselves Watchers, descendants of an ancient race that had taken on the responsibility of guarding reality itself. For thousands of years, they had maintained barriers between dimensions, keeping hungry entities trapped in the spaces between worlds. Research notes, Dr. Michael Kim, Dimensional Physics Division. Another file read, "The entities we call devourers exist in parallel dimensions that overlap our own. They feed on reality itself, consuming not just matter and energy, but the very concept of existence. A single devourer can erase an entire star system so completely that it never existed at all." Jiwoo felt a chill run through his cybernetic systems. The disappearing star systems, the twisted ships, the archaeological sites that drove people insane. It all made sense now. These were signs of dimensional barriers failing, of ancient hungry things breaking through into normal space. He found training manuals for something called Reality Guard Units, detailing how human soldiers learned to fight enemies that existed in multiple dimensions at once. The weapons described in these files were beyond anything the current galactic civilizations possessed. Devices that could wound entities made of living space, barriers that could seal rifts in the fabric of reality itself. Every human military base was actually a monitoring station, Jiwoo realized as he studied the data. Every restricted zone marked a place where the barriers were thin. Every routine patrol was actually a response to some dimensional threat. Meanwhile, Admiral Kyung-min sat in the emergency command center of the Altarian Defense Fleet, one of the few military forces still functioning in the chaos. Before him, holographic displays showed the current state of the galaxy, and the picture was terrifying. Red zones marked areas where ships had disappeared or been found twisted into impossible shapes. Yellow zones showed regions where reality seemed unstable, where instruments gave readings that made no sense. Green zones, safe areas, were shrinking every day. "Admiral," reported his aide, a nervous young officer whose species Jiwoo couldn't immediately identify. "We've lost contact with the Cygnus colony. That's the third system this week." Kyung-min studied the tactical display. The Cygnus colony had been located near what humans once called the Meridian Line, a region they had heavily fortified for unknown reasons. Now that region was completely empty, not just of life, but of space itself. Looking at it through telescopes showed only a void that hurt the mind to perceive. "What about the evacuation efforts?" Kyung-min asked. 50% of the civilian population has been relocated to the inner systems, the aide replied. "But the safe zones are shrinking faster than we can move people. And sir, there's something else." The aide activated a new display showing energy readings from across the galaxy. The patterns were strange, showing spikes of activity that followed no known physical laws. Dr. Hyejin Yang believes these energy signatures match the quantum distortions that appear just before a system disappears, the aide explained. "If she's right, we can predict which areas will be affected next." Kyung-min felt a moment of hope, then noticed the pattern of predicted strikes. They formed a spiral moving inward toward the galactic core, consuming everything in their path. "How long before they reach the core systems?" he asked. "At current rates of expansion, approximately 18 months, sir." On the research vessel, Harmony, Dr. Hyejin Yang worked frantically to understand the quantum signatures of the disappearing systems. Her instruments were crude compared to what humans had possessed, but they were sensitive enough to detect the dimensional distortions that preceded each vanishing. "The entities leave traces," she explained to her research team. "When they consume reality, they create quantum echoes in nearby space. By studying these echoes, we can understand how they operate." Her assistant, a crystalline being named Kes-7, chimed with confusion. "But if they erase things so completely, how can there be echoes?" "Because they don't erase everything at once," Hyejin replied, showing them her analysis. "They consume reality in layers, first matter, then energy, then space-time itself, and finally the information that proves something ever existed. There's a brief window between each layer where traces remain." She had been studying these traces for months, and the picture that emerged was horrifying. The entities weren't just destroying things randomly. They were following a pattern, a deliberate strategy of consumption that suggested intelligence. "Look at this," she said, displaying a map of the disappeared systems. "They're not just eating whatever they encounter. They're systematically dismantling the galaxy's defensive structure." The pattern was clear once she pointed it out. The entities were targeting former human monitoring stations first, then the worlds that had supported those stations, then the trade routes that connected them. They were methodically removing everything that had once been part of humanity's protective network. "It's as if they know exactly what the humans were doing," Kes 7 observed, "as if they've been watching and planning for thousands of years." Hai-Jin nodded grimly. "I think that's exactly what happened. The humans weren't just fighting random monsters. They were at war with an intelligence that had been studying them for millennia, learning their weaknesses, waiting for the right moment to strike." She pulled up her most disturbing discovery, a quantum echo that she had detected just before humanity's disappearance. The signature was massive, far larger than anything associated with the individual vanishings. "This appeared exactly 24 hours before the humans left," she explained. "Something enormous stirred in the deepest dimensional layers, something that made the humans realize they couldn't protect the galaxy from their current position." Her team stared at the readings in stunned silence. The entity that had awakened was orders of magnitude larger than the ones currently consuming star systems. If it ever fully entered normal space, it wouldn't just erase individual systems. It would devour entire galactic arms. "The humans didn't abandon us," Hye-Jin realized with sudden clarity. "They retreated to fight this thing on its own level, in the dimensions where it lives. They're still fighting, but in spaces we can't even perceive." As if responding to her words, her instrument suddenly detected something new. A strange quantum signature unlike anything they had recorded before. It was coming from the direction of the galactic rim, from regions that had been empty since humanity's departure. "What is that?" asked Kes 7, studying the readings with confusion. Hye-Jin adjusted her sensors, trying to get a clearer picture. What she saw made her gasp with hope and terror in equal measure. "It's them," she whispered. "The humans. They're coming back." But the signatures showed that whatever was returning wasn't quite human anymore. The quantum patterns were too complex, existing in too many dimensions at once. The humans had changed themselves into something that could fight entities of living space, becoming beings that existed partially outside normal reality. "Send a message to all remaining council forces," Hye-Jin ordered. "Tell them to prepare for the humans' return, but warn them. The beings coming back may not be the humans who left." Across the galaxy, the few surviving leaders received her message with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Humanity was returning, but as saviors who had paid a price that changed them beyond recognition. The war for reality itself was about to begin in earnest, and no one knew if the galaxy would survive what the humans had become in order to save it. 7 years had passed since humanity vanished, and the galaxy was facing its final days. What had once been a civilization of trillions across thousands of worlds had shrunk to a few billion survivors huddled in the innermost systems. The Devourers had consumed entire galactic arms, erasing them so completely that most people couldn't even remember they had ever existed. Former Galactic Council President Sang-Ho Lee stood in the command center of Sanctuary Station, the last major stronghold of galactic civilization. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the twisted remains of space where the outer systems used to be. Reality itself looked sick there, full of angles that shouldn't exist and colors that hurt to perceive. "Status report," he ordered, though he already knew what his officers would tell him. "We've lost the Vega colonies overnight," reported Commander Yex, her reptilian features tight with exhaustion. "The entire sector just stopped being there. Our ships that were patrolling the area found nothing but empty space. No debris, no energy signatures, nothing." Sang-Ho nodded grimly. It was the same story they heard every day. The Devourers weren't just destroying things. They were erasing them from reality so thoroughly that only those with special mental shielding could remember they had ever existed. "What about our defensive efforts?" he asked. Commander Yex's scales dulled with defeat. The plasma cannons had no effect. The quantum torpedoes passed right through the entities as if they weren't there. Even our most powerful weapons can't hurt something that exists between dimensions. Intelligence Officer Mi Young entered the command center, carrying a datapad with her latest findings. Her face was pale with exhaustion and fear. "Sir, I've been analyzing the pattern of disappearances," she said. "The entities are consuming reality in a specific sequence. They're not just randomly destroying things. They're following the old human defensive network in reverse." She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy as it had been before humanity's departure. Green. Lines marked the human patrol routes, monitoring stations, and restricted zones. Red areas showed where the Devourers had struck. "They know exactly what the humans were doing," Mi Young continued. "Every system they've targeted was part of humanity's protective network. They're systematically dismantling all the defenses that kept them contained for thousands of years." Sang-Ho studied the display with growing horror. The pattern was clear. The entities were working their way inward along the same routes that human ships had once used to respond to dimensional threats. "How long before they reach the core systems?" he asked. "At current rates, perhaps 3 months," Mi Young replied. "But sir, there's something else. I found evidence that these entities have been planning this attack for centuries." She showed him intercepted transmissions from the early days of the crisis. The signals were unlike anything produced by known technology, patterns of communication that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "They've been watching us, learning from every encounter with human forces. They know our weaknesses, our capabilities, our defensive strategies. This isn't a random invasion. It's a calculated campaign of extinction." Meanwhile, in a hidden research facility on the planet Haven, Dr. Jae-Sung Park worked desperately to understand samples of Devourer essence that his team had managed to capture. The substance defied all known laws of physics, existing simultaneously in several dimensional states. "It's not really matter as we understand it," he explained to his assistant, Dr. Kess Prime. "It's more like living mathematics. Pure information given form, but information that consumes other information to grow stronger." The Devourer essence was contained in a specially designed chamber that used principles discovered in abandoned human research facilities. Even so, the substance constantly tried to break free, pressing against the walls of its prison like a caged animal. "The humans fought these things for thousands of years," Dr. Kess Prime observed, her crystalline form reflecting the strange light emanating from the sample. "How did they manage to contain them for so long?" Jae-Sung pulled up files recovered from human databases. The records showed battle after battle against dimensional intruders, with human forces using weapons and tactics that seemed impossible. "They didn't just fight them in our dimension," he realized. "Look at these tactical reports. Human soldiers were somehow able to enter parallel realities to fight the Devourers in their own space. They had technology that could wound entities, made of living mathematics." As he spoke, the Devourer essence suddenly became more active, pulsing with malevolent energy. The containment chamber's alarms began to sound. "It's trying to communicate," Dr. Kess Prime said, studying the energy patterns. "The mathematical structures are forming complex patterns." Against his better judgment, Jae-Sung activated a translation protocol designed for non-standard communications. The results chilled him to his core. "We hunger," the message read. "Reality. Tastes sweet. Humans delayed feast but could not stop it. Now we feed until nothing remains," the message continued, revealing the true scope of the threat. The entities had been consuming realities across multiple universes for eons, growing stronger with each meal. They had tried to invade this galaxy before, but the humans and their predecessors had always managed to drive them back. Watchers gone. Barriers broken. Great feast begins. All will be consumed. All will be forgotten. Jae-Sung quickly shut down the communication link, but the damage was done. The Devourer essence had learned about their location, their defenses, their research. Even now, he could feel something vast and hungry turning its attention toward their hidden facility. Across the galaxy, the few remaining resistance cells tried desperately to find some way to fight back. On the mining world of Kepler-9, a group of survivors had discovered something that gave them brief hope. The world had once hosted a human colony, and the colonists had built their cities according to specific geometric patterns. When the Devourers attacked the planet, they had consumed everything except the areas within those patterns. The human architecture somehow anchored reality, making it impossible for the entities to erase. But this protection came at a terrible cost. The safe zones were small, barely large enough to shelter a few thousand people each, and they were shrinking every day as the Devourers pressed against the geometric barriers from multiple dimensions. Similar discoveries were made across the surviving worlds. Every remaining safe haven was built on the foundation of human protective architecture. The colonists who had dismantled these structures after humanity's departure had doomed their worlds to complete consumption. In the depths of space, the automated systems of Commander Taeho's ship detected something that filled his digital consciousness with desperate hope. A quantum signature was approaching from the galactic rim, the same type of signal that had appeared just before humanity's departure. "They're coming back," he transmitted to anyone who might be listening. "The humans are returning." But as the signal grew stronger, Taeho realized that what was coming back wasn't quite human anymore. The quantum patterns were too complex, existing in dimensions that his sensors couldn't fully map. The humans had transformed themselves into something that could fight entities of living space. The message reached Sanctuary Station just as the Devourers launched their final assault on the core systems. Reality began to unravel around the station as vast tentacled shapes pressed through dimensional barriers, hungry for the last morsels of existence. Sang-Ho Lee watched through the command center's windows as space itself began to dissolve. Stars winked out of existence, not destroyed, but erased so completely that they had never been. The few remaining ships of his fleet fired uselessly at enemies that existed between the spaces where matter could touch. "All units, prepare for final evacuation," he ordered, though he knew there was nowhere left to run. The Devourers had consumed everything else. Then, just as reality seemed about to collapse entirely, something new appeared on the sensors. Ships, unlike anything in the galactic databases, emerged from dimensional rifts near the station. Their hulls seemed to exist in multiple realities at once, shifting between solid matter and pure mathematics. "Unknown vessels, identify yourselves," Commander Yex transmitted. The response came in voices that harmonized across several dimensions, speaking words that bypassed the ears and communicated directly with the mind. "We are what humanity became," the message said. "We are the Watchers returned from the spaces between spaces. We have come to finish what we started." The transformed humans had returned to save what remained of the galaxy they had once called home. But as their ships began engaging the Devourers in battles that spanned multiple realities, everyone watching knew that the war for existence itself had only just begun. The price of ignorance had nearly destroyed everything, but perhaps, with humanity's return, there was still hope for salvation. 10 years had passed since humanity's departure, and now they returned to a galaxy on the edge of complete destruction. But the beings that emerged from dimensional rifts around Sanctuary Station were no longer the humans who had left. They had become something far more than mortal flesh and blood. Captain Taeho materialized on the station's bridge, his form shifting between human appearance and geometric patterns that existed in multiple dimensions. The crew stared in wonder and terror as reality bent around him, making the air itself sing with harmonies from parallel worlds. "Greetings, survivors," he said, his voice resonating across several realities at once. "We have returned from the spaces between spaces, where time flows differently and battles rage across dimensions you cannot see." Commander Yex stepped forward cautiously. "Captain Taeho, is it really you?" The transformed human smiled, though his face flickered between solid matter and living mathematics. "I am still Taeho, but I am also more than I was. We all are. The humans you knew could not fight entities made of pure information. So we became something that could." Through the station's windows, the most incredible battle in galactic history was beginning. The human ships moved through space in ways that defied physics, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their weapons fired not energy or matter, but concentrated reality itself, beams of pure existence that could wound creatures made of living void. The Devourers responded with attacks that tried to erase the human vessels from history, but the Transformed humans had learned to anchor themselves across multiple timelines. When the entities tried to make them never exist, backup versions of the ships simply shifted into normal space from parallel realities. Commander Sujin Na appeared beside Tai Ho, her form a constantly shifting equation that somehow maintained human consciousness within mathematical structures. She turned to address the surviving galactic leaders with compassion in her multidimensional eyes. "We know this is frightening," she said, her words creating visible patterns in the air around her. "We know we appear strange to you now, but we are still the same beings who once lived among you. We simply chose to become what was necessary to protect what we love." President Sang-Ho Lee found his voice, despite his amazement. "What happened to you out there? How did you become this?" Sujin's form stabilized slightly, becoming more recognizably human. "We retreated to dimensions where the Devourers live, where reality is just one option among many. We fought them in spaces made of pure thought, on battlefields constructed from living time itself. It took centuries of subjective experience, though only 10 years passed in your timeline." She gestured toward the ongoing battle outside where human ships danced between dimensional layers while engaging entities that existed as mobile tiers in reality itself. "We learned to merge our consciousness with mathematics, to become beings of organized information that could fight beings of chaotic void. We became living equations that could solve for the salvation of reality itself." Dr. Eun-Jung Kim manifested in the station's medical bay, her transformed presence immediately beginning to repair damage that the Devourers had inflicted on local space-time. Her form appeared as a constant flow of healing energy, mending the tears that the entities had made in the fabric of reality. "The barriers between dimensions are badly damaged," she explained to the station's chief medical officer. "But we can repair them. We have learned to weave reality itself, to patch the holes through which these creatures enter our universe." Around her, teams of hybrid human-AI beings worked to restore the protective barriers that had once kept the galaxy safe. They moved through multiple dimensions at once, their actions visible in normal space only as strange lights and impossible sounds that made observers feel hope instead of fear. The battle raged for hours, with transformed humans engaging Devourers across multiple layers of existence. The humans had become something that could hurt entities made of pure hunger, weapons that could wound creatures that fed on existence itself. But the war was not without cost. Some human ships flickered out of existence as their crews pushed too deep into hostile dimensions. Other transformed humans burned themselves out, maintaining the barriers, their consciousness scattered across multiple realities to prevent reality rifts from opening. "We cannot save everyone," admitted Captain Jamin as he coordinated the human fleet's movements. His form appeared as a shifting constellation of stars that somehow conveyed human emotion, despite being made of living light. "The damage is too extensive, the consumed realities too numerous. But we can save enough to ensure that life continues." The tide of battle began to turn as the humans established new dimensional barriers, cutting off the Devourers from their feeding grounds in parallel realities. The entities that had seemed unstoppable began to weaken as their source of power was restricted. Admiral Hai Wan directed the final phase of the operation, her consciousness spread across dozens of ships simultaneously. She had become a living battle network, able to coordinate actions across multiple dimensions with perfect precision. "All units, begin the containment protocol," she transmitted through channels that existed in several realities at once. "Drive them back to the deep layers where they belong." The transformed humans worked together to create a massive dimensional cage, trapping the remaining Devourers in spaces between the spaces where they could no longer reach normal reality. It was a process that required incredible sacrifice, with many humans pouring their transformed essence into the barriers to make them strong enough to hold. As the last of the entities were contained, the surviving galactic population could finally see the true cost of their salvation. The galaxy that emerged from the crisis was a shadow of what it had been. Billions of worlds were gone forever, entire civilizations erased so completely that only the dimensional humans could remember they had existed. But life would continue. The remaining worlds were protected by barriers stronger than anything that had existed before, maintained by humans who had chosen to become eternal guardians of reality itself. Ambassador Jun-Ho appeared before the reformed Galactic Council, his form shifting between recognizable humanity and the mathematical patterns he had become. He addressed the few billion survivors with both sadness and hope in his multidimensional voice. "We understand that we appear strange to you now," he said. "We understand that we are no longer the humans you once knew. But we are still fundamentally the same beings who once lived among you, loved among you, dreamed among you." He paused, his form stabilizing into something that looked almost entirely human, though lights flickered in his eyes that suggested vast depths of experience. "We have chosen to remain in our transformed state because the threats to reality never truly end. The Devourers were just one type of entity that exists in the spaces between worlds. There are others, and they will eventually try to break through again." The council members listened in awed silence as Jun-Ho continued. "We will watch from dimensions you cannot perceive. We will fight battles you cannot imagine. We will bear burdens you cannot comprehend. This is our choice, our purpose, our gift to the galaxy we still call home." As he spoke, other transformed humans began to fade from normal space, returning to the dimensional layers where they would maintain their eternal vigil. They left behind a galaxy scarred but saved, protected by guardians who had sacrificed their humanity to preserve everything human. The last image the survivors had of their protectors was of lights dancing between the stars, patterns of organized energy that somehow conveyed the message that they would never truly be alone. Humanity had departed as one thing and returned as another, but their core purpose remained unchanged: to protect life, to preserve hope, and to stand guard against the darkness that always pressed at the edges of reality. The galaxy was saved, though it would never be the same. And in the spaces between spaces, the Watchers resumed their eternal duty.